Hey folks, thanks for joining me for this episode from the Embellish Pod. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists. And if you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com and I'll try to get that taken care of. You can also find video versions of this podcast on YouTube. You can find all of my links on Instagram at embellishpod or TikTok with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. It's a place to pick up these links, episode details, and more. I have recently migrated the hosting of the podcast and the website to Substack. So go have a look over there at embellishpod.com and you can maybe see some articles, some different things that we're going to do from a written format in the near future. So today I'm going to have Hank joining me from Ingram Distillery, also the Ingram Barge Company, and I've been following what they've been doing for a while. You can actually go back to one of my earliest episodes where I talk about unique aging concepts, and I speak specifically about what Ingram is doing. Today is a follow-up for that, right? So a couple of years later, we get an opportunity to talk to the people who are making the whiskey and explore that brand. So I hope you guys enjoy. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Whether you happen to be watching this in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, or whatever, I have Hank joining me from Ingram Distillery. Hank, if you would kind of give us the elevator speech on what Ingram is. I've actually talked about you guys in the past. I got a question I want to ask you later on, but when you guys first sort of launched, I'm all on board with it, mainly because I'm in far Western Kentucky. And so whenever you hear people in Kentucky talking about Western Kentucky, they're usually talking about Owensboro or Bowling Green. And there's like 3.5 more hours of state. And there's actually like 3 or 4 distilleries over here now. And you guys are a part of that. So kind of give me the speech on what Ingram is and how it came to be.
Yeah, well, John, it's great to be with you. And yeah, I always think it's funny when I tell people we're in Western Kentucky and they're like, "Oh, I've been to Bowling Green." It's like, well, that's Central Kentucky by our standards. So,
Yep.
yeah, so I got started about a decade ago. Actually, this month makes a clean decade. Um, and my background, family has been in the river shipping business for over 165 years. Started out moving timber down rivers back in the 1860s, and then elevated that to moving barges in the 30s, and that's something that our family's been doing pretty much ever since. And so have a family history of building things on the river. I got acquainted with really the history of bourbon and its river roots. So for those of your listeners that don't know, bourbon really owes a lot to the river, particularly because it was an early form of distribution. It allowed, especially in the late 1700s, early 1800s, it allowed for the product that we now know as bourbon to be moved from the kind of interior of bourbon country to really the rest of the world by the river system. And as it was moving down the river, it spent time interacting with the cardboard box of the day, which was the barrel. All right. And so they char these barrels to clean them out. In process of doing so, they actually create a better aging environment for that whiskey to be um, in terms of a reaction chamber. But as it makes its way down the river, it's aging on the water with the fluctuations of the water, just the motion, the temperature, the humidity, that microclimate. And I said, well, gosh, what a cool history. Why is nobody doing it today? And that was the burning question that I really wanted to ask. That I was asking and wanted to see if there was something to it. And I started my journey, as I said, 10 years ago, really to see if the river would improve a bourbon. And so the Ingram Distillery was formed. Back then, we called ourselves Brown Water Spirits because I knew I was going to be moving brown water on brown water. Right. So I didn't know what the marketing name was going to be. So we started with Brown Water Spirits, and that's still kind of the technical name of the company. But in 2023, we actually acquired our current location in Columbus, Kentucky. And we're now in the process of building out our distillery for tours that'll open in the spring, April of next year of 2026. And it is all centered around this idea that everything that we do is going to be authentically Ingram,
Mhm.
and it is going to leverage the river roots of my family and the river roots of bourbon, and there will be no other rick houses involved unless they float. That's it. Short and simple.
So, I've like I said, I've talked about this in the past, and I did a little research. The first time I talked about it, and then subsequently for this particular episode. And the initial idea for this, right, if I remember correctly, this comes out of a project during your MBA, right? You're working on an MBA. I did an MBA. I did a project. My project didn't become a business, so like it feels like a very audacious step to take something from an idea into fruition, especially a distillery, something of this magnitude. Um, was there some sort of a thought process you had where you're like, I know this can work? Because I've talked to a lot of people that have built brands, and they say, if I'd have known the size of the thing that I was trying to do before I began, I might have been scared away from doing it. Being that this was an MBA project, you may have had some idea of scale. Like, what was the thing that made this like, this is it?
No, I had no clue what I was doing. And John, that's the superpower of an entrepreneur, ignorance. Because if you actually standing today, if I had known all of this back 10 years ago, it's kind of like when you're looking up at like Yosemite, and you see the sheer peaks, and you think, people climb this? What are they thinking?
Mhm.
Um, and so it's almost a superpower to not know, but just to kind of brave into it. So I was at Vanderbilt University's Owen Graduate School of Management, and I did this project. Well, it was a class. It was called Launching the Venture,
Mhm.
and the great thing about this class is you're there with people that want to do big things, and there's
Mhm.
just kind of this energy in an MBA program, and it was a great way to get free labor to create a business plan, right? So we spent 8 weeks kind of going through,
Mhm.
and each week sharpening the plan, and then I gave a presentation in the class against other businesses, and we won. Um, and had we not won the class, I don't know if I would have had the kind of wind in the sails to say, I'm going to do this. If
Mhm.
we'd gotten dead last, I probably would have said, well, gosh, that was fun, but seems like nobody really is interested. But
Mhm.
the fact that everybody, and in fact, actually, I just got a text from one of the TAs from that class. He's coming back for a reunion this week, and he's like, "Hey, are you going to be around? I want to catch up." And I think a lot of that's because we weren't doing a healthcare innovation; we were doing whiskey,
Mhm.
and so that was the um, early push.
Mhm.
But when it became real, um, I it was right before the win. Um, I had a chance to go to Lynchburg, Tennessee, little company, little startup, about 150 years old, called Jack Daniels, and I had a chance to meet with Jeff Arnett, who was then the master distiller at
Mhm.
Jack, and we went into the top of the rick house of one of their rick houses. He showed us everything, and we spend time in this barrel house, and he's over there with his drill, and he's drilling into a barrel, and we're talking about you know whiskey, and I was thinking about, okay, I'm going to really go hang out with a gorilla. I'm going to keep my cards close to my chest. I just kind of maybe drip a little bit of information here. Well, I had one sip of that whiskey, and I gave him my entire business plan in about 2 minutes, and the you know the reaction from this guy that's been around a long time, is at the one of the most coveted positions in the world of spirits, says, that's interesting. you know you like this or that and that, like, those could do things that could have an effect. I would be interested to see how that plays out. And then he followed up with saying, well, it's not something Jack Daniels would ever do. We
Mhm.
got plenty of other things on our hands, but it's interesting. And it was those early validations. And then one other, I'll call it the third, uh, leg of the stool was my godfather. My godfather is a guy named Robert Lippman. He is a third generation distributor. And in fact, he's the one that set up the trip to Jack Daniels because his family was the first distributor of Jack Daniels. So he and the Motlows grew up together. I mean, he's got these fabulous stories of Jack from the early days, and also he's my dad's best friend. And I went and sat down with him, and my dad, a little beknownst to me, had called ahead of time and said, "Hey, Robert, I need you to talk Hank out of this crazy idea." And I go and I spent about an hour and a half just kind of laying out my case. This is what I want to do. Put whiskey barrels in a barge. He says, "Well, barrels need airflow, so we'll cut holes and we'll put some vents and things." And he said, "Okay, well, that whiskey, it catches on fire, it can blow up." And I said, "Well, we can come up with some suppression systems. There's things on boats that pretty standard." And he posed a lot of hard questions, and are you willing to work at it? The whiskey business is not an easy business to be in. And after about an hour and a half, I left and had some good things to think about. And my dad called him up. He said, "Well, how'd it go?" He says, "Well, it's a cockamamie idea, but I got bad news for you." He says, "I think you're going to have to open up your checkbook because I've already committed, and you're probably going to need to match it."
Mhm.
So a little bit knows to me, I had funding, and I had people that were like, "This is a crazy enough idea that I'd back it."
Mhm. And the entrepreneur story of basically being too stupid to quit is very thorough, right? I work all the time, and I say usually the reason I am successful is because I'm too stupid to know that this is not a thing that we should be doing, right? And so we're just going to kind of keep going. But you just said you're 10 years into this process, and so um, there's some validation that exists inside this. You got some early signs from some people significantly in the industry that this could succeed. If you've made it 10 years in a business, that means you probably are succeeding. And it feels like that 2025 has been a really big year for the Ingram Distillery. You launched Uncharted, which we'll talk about a little more. You're on your fifth annual flagship batch. You're expanding into new markets of, say, I think I read Alaska and Texas, which, Texas is a huge state. Alaska is a huge state. Um, there's a lot of momentum there, and there's probably been several times where it didn't feel like that momentum was there. But what's driving this kind of acceleration, maybe in a market that is maybe tightening a little bit at the same time?
Well, John, my grandfather used to have a saying. He said, "If you're not growing, you're dying."
Mhm.
And I look at it and say, my pro forma said I was supposed to be in a very different place than where I am today.
Mhm.
But I surrounded myself with patient capital and people that buy into what we're trying to do, and they are very understanding when we hit
Mhm.
roadblocks, and they're not, "Oh gosh, what are we going to do?" It's more like, keep at it, think about it this way, maybe you should think about this. And yeah, we've not been perfect out of the gate. We've made several mistakes that people that have been in this industry would say, "Why the heck would you do that? You know,
Mhm.
why would you, um, launch a rye before your bourbon? And why would you, use that color for that?" And I said, "Well, because it's what I wanted to do at the time. I don't know. I didn't know it was a bad idea. It wasn't a bad idea. It's just a different way to do it." So yeah, you're right on our flagship. So that's a perfect case in itself. If you are in the whiskey world, people refer to their flagship as that's their everyday pour, right?
Mhm.
That's their widely available. That's what they build the brand on. We take the opposite approach because I come at it from a nautical standpoint. All right. And in nautical terms, you have only one flagship. And that was the ship that the admiral was on because he had all the flags to command the fleet.
Mhm.
And that's how they communicated. And of course, the admiral is always going to be on the best looking fleet or boat in the fleet. And we have a flagship in the barge industry. Our flagship vessel is the E. Bronson Ingram and the Martha R. Ingram, which are named after my grandparents,
Mhm.
and they are some pretty big and good looking boats. So I said we're going to name our best our best release that we can do each year. We're going to call that the flagship. And I had folks make fun of me because they're like, "What are you doing calling your flagship? Like that just it's backwards." So
Hmm.
it's one of those things that again, would I do it any differently? No. Would I have positioned it differently? Maybe.
Hmm.
Um, and so are we doing things right? It's one of those things that it's like golf. I'm not a great golfer, but when I hit a really great shot, it makes me forget about all the other
Hmm.
stuff. All right. And this year has kind of been one of those years of it started slow, right? People are talking about, oh gosh, the industry is it's getting tough. It's like finding shelf spaces, distributors. Yeah, we're actually significantly up. I mean, it's off of a smaller base, but we've almost doubled all of our volume, and we're up in all the markets. And like I don't say that to be braggadocious. I say that because I've been saying the same thing long enough that people are finally realizing, like,
Hmm.
oh, hey, maybe there's something here. I should revisit it. And our flagship of 2024. Um, Fred Minnick, who is kind of a well-known critic in the industry, he placed it in his top 10 out of his top 100 of the year. We beat out several of the Pappies.
Hmm.
That was kind of one of those like, oh, okay, that was a good shot. You know, that
Yeah.
that that to me, that
Yes.
was like almost making a hole in one. That was like, you're
Right.
like 6 inches short and just like,
Hmm.
actually, I guess 9 inches short.
Yeah.
Um, and then this year, a company in Texas called Specs,
Hmm.
they called up and they said, "Hey, actually they didn't call up. They sent a very vague email. We're interested in talking to you about bringing on your whiskey." And I never heard of Specs. I'm not from Texas. I don't know. And I told our general manager Rachel. I said, "Hey, we got an email from Specs." She says, "Really? Do you know who Specs is?" I'm like, "Never heard of them." She says, "They're
Uh-huh.
big." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And you know, right out of the gate, they put us in 78 stores. And have been really bought into what we're doing. So like, uh, I have a lot of hard days. I have a lot of days I go home just like, man, like let me just hit that wall. Just let me feel
Hmm.
something. But then I get some days where you get an email from, just an unexpected, it's a rush. Like that's like chipping it close.
Hmm.
And those just start to build on each other. And I think one of the other things, John, that we learned is uh, selling whiskey and making whiskey. You can't be good at one or the other. You have to be good at both of them at the
Hmm.
same time. And I think a lot of folks that start this, they say, I make a great product. Why isn't it selling? It's like, well, you make a great product, but guess what? A lot of people make great products too. Um, at the end of the day, you have to build an infrastructure. You have to
Hmm.
build a team because there aren't 19 distilleries anymore in Kentucky. There's like 162.
Hmm.
And that's a lot. That's a lot more for a distributor to have. It's like, oh, hey, you want a bourbon? I got two you could choose from. Now they've got 27.
Yep.
Right. So I think one of the biggest things that we have learned in this whole process is make a great whiskey, but get really good at telling your story and doing the mechanics of selling, because you can't do both, or you can't do one without the other, or you're just not going to get anywhere. And you
Hmm.
certainly can't make bad whiskey. You got to make great whiskey, but then you also got to be really good at telling the story.
Yeah, I mean, storytelling is one of the main reasons that I sort of he was like, I'm a middle aged man with a microphone, right? So obviously, let's do a podcast, right? Because that's what you're supposed to do, right? That's what you do. But the storytelling aspect of it, I think, is one of the most important things for me because you said there's 162 distilleries in Kentucky. Almost none of those distilleries have only one SKU, right? And so when you're looking at the shelf space, you're really looking at a really crowded shelf space because there's over 400 SKUs probably in those 162 distilleries, and so that's your marketplace. That's what you're
Higher than that, I think it's
right.
900.
That was just some easy math of like some folks might have two, some folks have 10, right? But just at bare minimum, you're competing with Kentucky whiskeys 400 or 500 at a time, so you have to have something that is kind of more grabbing, right? And there's a bunch of folks that are doing the like, oh, well, my family has a loose attachment to bootlegging from, 50 years ago or 100 years ago, or we have these old recipes or whatever else. Finding a different way to market, I think, is really important, and that's what I really like about what you guys are doing. Because, and I've watched, something as simple as like booth size and attendance at the bourbon festival, right? So the first year you're there, you're at a smaller spot, you're kind of tucked in a corner, and maybe not as many people. This year there's lines and there's a much bigger presence, right? And so you're looking at a multiple year growth because people are starting to learn the story of it all. They're moving away from, maybe chasing. They're always going to chase allocations, that's for sure. But people are getting more interested in more flavor profiles. Now, you guys also fill the space of being a non-distilling producer where you're purchasing whiskey, right? And you're purchasing your whiskey from Green River, which is a great place. A lot of people are doing that. And you started doing that when Jacob Call was there, and then Jacob Call is no longer with it. He's kind of started his own thing. Um, was there any concern over maybe was the quality of what you're going to get change as that master distiller concept changes, as ownership of Green River changes, or did you just have full confidence in what they had available to you?
So, um, excuse me. I have a sick kid at home, and he has been gracious enough to share. Um, so when it comes to our distillate, we started out originally with MGP,
Mm-hmm.
but I had the early on I said I want to be fully Kentucky,
Mm-hmm.
partly because Kentucky and bourbon they go together. Yeah, you can make bourbon anywhere in the United States, but bourbon and Kentucky go together so
Mm-hmm.
well. And I figured I'm putting whiskey on a barge. I'm already doing enough crazy stuff. Like I don't need anything else for people to like, oh, well, it's not bourbon because it's
Mm-hmm.
Tennessee or yada, yada, yada. So, I've only got so many marketing dollars to educate folks on. Um, and so I had a relationship that had been in the industry for a long time. And I called up a guy named Jason McMurray, and Jason was with a group called Brindiamo,
Mm-hmm.
and they did a lot of kind of barrel brokering and had a lot of relationships. It's crazy to think like 2016, 2017, I thought the bourbon industry was on fire. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what was going to be happening, 6, 7, 8 years after that. Just wild how it really reached a fever pitch there. And so I went into some of these early places. So Green River, I've been filling barrels with them since they were OZ Tyler.
Mm-hmm.
I think we started with them in 2018, and it was because they were logistically close, and
Mm-hmm.
the gentleman in the industry, Jason, that I knew and trusted, spoke very highly
Mm-hmm.
of what they were producing, and I tried it, and sure enough, it was fabulous. And that's what we've built our brand on. So, I had a chance to meet Aaron, the new master distiller, when he came on and try the distillate that he was making. And I have no doubts that
Mm-hmm.
we're going to see continued great things. And when you have ownership change, there is always risk, right? Well, how are they going to do things? But if it's the right ownership group that comes in, you can hurt things, and you can improve things, or you can leave them the same. Nobody ever leaves them the same, right? So they're either going to hurt them or they're going to make them better. And I think coming in, they actually made things better.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm really excited to see how these barrels that we've been laying down through a new master distiller, um, how they grow and change and reflect over time. Our oldest barrels are 7 years old, so I think we have some of the earliest Green River barrels, and then so we can really track that library across time. So that's fun, and we have no other rick house, so when those barrels are filled, they're coming off the distillery floor out on a truck, going straight on
Mm-hmm.
a barge. So um, it is a totally different set of variables that we play with. And to see our whiskey, I'd say, diverge from kind of the base profile is also it's what continues to keep us excited. At the end of the day, you have to have that thing that
Mm-hmm.
when you hit that wall, when you have a tough day, you have to still remember, man, we have some really stellar stuff,
Right.
and we'll keep shouting from the mountaintop, and we'll keep shouting, and eventually people will figure it out. But we know we got good stuff.
Yeah. I mean, and I think it's been evident, at least through market reaction and through what I've seen from consumer response at events that I've been to that you guys have had either a presence or had a bottle at. I want to pivot a little bit and talk about the physical location, right? So you guys are building out a spot in Columbus, Kentucky. And Columbus wasn't necessarily the first place where you started mooring your barges, but that's where you've moved to subsequently. And, you know, being kind of attached to the Ingram Marine Group, right? They've got, you've got an office in Nashville, and then you've got some office in Paducah as well, right? And Paducah is far easier to reach than Columbus is, and so whenever you're building out a site, deciding where you're going to go, what puts you in a situation where you're like, we're going to go out here to Columbus as opposed to a place where there's already maybe a tourism base, as opposed to being out there.
Um, well, yeah, you're right. If I was smart, I would have put this where there's a bunch of people, not where there's 131 people, living in a town. But um, one, Columbus is gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
The geography there, the views, the vistas. Our distillery sits on a bluff that's 200 foot over above the barges and looks out over the flat of Missouri. I mean, it's the best sunsets that you can see.
Mm-hmm.
So that's nice. But the reason we chose Columbus is really for two reasons. One, existing infrastructure. So with the family marine group there, we did have really the infrastructure to keep the barge, most importantly, from floating away downriver filled with a bunch of whiskey. When that river fluctuates 50 feet from its low to its high point over the course of a year, and micro fluctuations there in between,
Mm-hmm.
you want to make sure that, when you've got millions of dollars of whiskey floating on a barge, it doesn't sink, it doesn't float away. Um, while it might be fun to be on the nightly news, that might be like a one hit wonder because I can only
Right.
imagine the alphabet soup of bureaucracies that would be on top of me if that happened.
Mm-hmm.
So that's clearly a plus, is to utilize some existing infrastructure, but also, and we do have infrastructure in Paducah,
Mm-hmm.
but being on the Mississippi was important to me. Mellowed on the Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for the Mississippi is, as I also said, that 50 feet of fluctuation. We're below all the lock and dams. So we are, and Paducah is above the Olmsted Lock,
Mm-hmm.
which creates a pool. And in some parts of the year, depending on where the water is, there may not even be a current.
Mm-hmm.
There's always a current in the Mississippi. Now, there may not be a lot of water in it in
Right.
drought, but there's always a current. And that current provides potential energy, I guess really kinetic energy. But there's more kinetic energy in the water below these lock and dams than there are on the pools that are
Mm-hmm.
created above these dams. So while Paducah would be interesting, I felt we were going to get more for the process in
Mm-hmm.
Columbus than we would have in Paducah.
Yeah. And just as an aside, and I don't want that question to feel like I framed it like, man, you should have been here. I think Columbus is the right choice, right? Because from my perspective as a consumer, as a fan, you're entering into a more genuine space as opposed to a place that you picked because you're going to have a captive populace of people that are coming in, whether it be, quilt show or whenever the riverboat docks or any other thing that's happening in Paducah that might draw people into town. Um, the story of Ingram Distillery is being on the river, storing your barrels on the river. And if I think about the real estate available to store on the river in Paducah is far more limited, far more painful, and probably a lot less beautiful because I grew up in Western Kentucky. I went to school here. Pretty much anybody west of the lakes has probably been to Columbus Belmont on a school trip, right? We've been over there. We've seen, kind of what is over there. And it is a beautiful location. I think it'll probably fit the identity of what you guys are doing. And you said something in there that I think a lot of people miss. And there's a couple of things that I want to kind of double back on that were part of that. One of it is the Mississippi River fluctuates 50 feet, right? I don't think a lot of people really that aren't near the Mississippi River understand that it's up and down is 50 vertical feet throughout the course of the year. And then you mentioned kinetic energy, and I want to know a little bit more about that. But talk to me a little bit about that 50-foot fluctuation. What does that mean if you're going to store your barrels on the river and you've got to get your barrels into the barge? It could be up or down that 50 feet as well. Like, how the hell do you get the barrels into the barge?
That was actually the most difficult question I had to solve for early on because,
Mm-hmm.
well, first of all, getting them on the barge and then getting the barrels into the racks. I mean, man, when I started this thing, the comedy of errors, and I also wanted to be very capital efficient.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to buy fancy equipment and whatnot because if I didn't spend it on forklifts or whatever, I got more money to put into barrels, and more barrels means more
Mm-hmm.
things to sell and future cash flow, all those things. Um, Maybe should have taken that down just a little bit because I bought a foot operated pallet jack. Yes, and that was how I was intending to load the racks.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a terrible idea because um, I had 300 barrels show up on the very first day when we were going to do this. And when I was working this machine without any weight on it, one pump would go about half an inch.
Right.
Once you had 2 barrels on it, one pump went up about an eighth of an inch. So now you're just over there just getting a calisthenic workout. I'd hold on to the thing. I'd be like, jumping. I'd be pushing it
Uh-huh.
this way, just doing all I could, working every muscle group so that I'd have something at the end of the day to, walk home and not just be all cramped in a ball. It didn't work. I still
Mm-hmm.
went home cramped in a ball. So that was interesting. Learned there's actually machinery that's made for the bourbon industry. Nobody ever puts that on the YouTube videos.
Mm-hmm.
You can't look up, barrel ricker and just get like, pages and
Right.
pages of like, oh, try ours, try ours. You have to like know the guy to call, know the secret handshake, and get on the list and wait 12 months for them to
Mm-hmm.
fabricate you one. Um, Other thing I didn't know was, what's a PO and a lead time. Lots of learning things I don't teach in
Right.
business school. So we started out craning these barrels in a container,
Mm-hmm.
and the barrels would come in on a truck. We'd take them off the truck. We'd put them in a container, and then we would drive this container down a ramp, and we'd have a crane that would pick up the container, set it into the barge, and then if this sounds like a lot of touches and insanity, you were right. It was a lot of touches and insanity.
Right.
Um, Moving to Columbus drastically changed the way that we could do this. So the way our setup is there, we actually back down a ramp, and again, yeah, that water can fluctuate 50 feet. So it can be either a short ramp or it can be a really long ramp.
Mm-hmm.
But we back it down, and then it comes onto the barge dock that we have, and then we back it up to another ramp. And the whole idea is it rolls off the bar or rolls off the truck when it comes in onto this other truck, which then backs up and then rolls. So where before we had to stand the barrels up and lay them down and stand them back up, and it was just a lot of manual labor. Now it's only slightly less manual labor.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm pleased to report of the over close to 6,000 barrels that we have on the barge, me and Scott Byer, our master blender, hand loaded every single one of those.
Wow.
I've touched every barrel on the barge. So
Mm-hmm.
while I may have accounting arms, it's really all in the hips. Just so you know, it's the secret is the hips. Yeah, you gotta
I
keep your
like
center
that
of gravity low.
accounting arms. I'm gonna keep that because I work in the software industry, so I have software arms. Um, but so
So there's hope for us all. Is all I can say.
right, yeah. So you've got this location in Columbus now, right, where you are easier to load barrels in, but you're also building out an opportunity for people to come on site and visit. Tell me a little bit about that, and maybe kind of weave in there like the juxtaposition of like an industrial facility and a tourist facility and how those things coexist.
Um, well, so if you showed up at Buffalo Trace 20 years ago, you've been
Yeah.
arrested for trespassing.
Right.
Now Buffalo Trace doesn't even charge for their tours. They just say,
Mm-hmm.
"Come on in and go buy whatever you want."
Right.
Limit one every 3 months, whatever their thing is. So, um, the fact that in the span of 20 years, we went from trespassing to come on in.
Hmm.
Um, most of these facilities are industrial. They've got they've had a little bit more head start to put lipstick on.
Hmm.
And we haven't had any time to put the lipstick on. I've been planting some trees, um, which in 20 years will look great,
Right.
and it'll, provide more shade and all the things.
Hmm.
I have a little bit of lipstick to go, but I guess the good news is if you come out on our soon to be launching tours in April, and we start sign up for those actually in December. Um, so if you're looking for a Christmas gift, gift card, visit to the Ingram Distillery and come check
Hmm.
us out. Um, so it's the barge itself, yes, is industrial, and I think that's kind of part of the charm is
Hmm.
it's not been over Disney World. It you do see that this is a working facility.
Hmm.
Um, Now, I don't want anybody getting crushed or burned or falling
Right.
in the river, and we've done a pretty good job of mitigating those risks, as you can imagine. I have um, people breathing down my neck to make sure that we are covering those risks, and we have. So where we start things off, though, is at the top of the hill, and at our new facility, the actual distillery itself. We bought about 25 acres on top of this hill, which is on the road. I mean, it's a eighth of a mile to the barge, and you can see it from where we are. But it's this beautiful bluff overlooking the river, and you can see clear to the horizon. I mean, it's probably one of the best views on the Mississippi. It really
Hmm.
takes the cake, um, until you get to like more of the northern areas where you get more hills and
Right.
the hard ground. Most people don't know this, but most of Mississippi is just it's all built on silt.
Hmm.
So that thing just moves. I'm sure at some point this place will fall down in the river and it'll be washed away, but it's probably my grandkids problem to solve, and hopefully they're still doing it.
Right.
So we bought 100-year-old building on the site. It was actually built as a hotel,
Hmm.
and it's across from the Columbus Belmont State Park. So that's literally our neighbor across the street, which is a really interesting park. For those that don't know, it has a lot of Civil War history, a
Hmm.
big Confederate and then Union occupied fortifications because they saw the Mississippi, and particularly this point on the Mississippi, as being so strategic. But on our side, the building is it was built in 1930,
Hmm.
and the old town of Columbus actually used to be in the what is now a soybean field, and where our barges are located. That was the old town of Columbus until the Mississippi River, as it did and does, shifted course and eventually came and put the town in danger of flooding. And in 1927, it flooded. So there were 3,000 people in 1927 in the town of Columbus, but it was wiped off the map. Well, the Red Cross comes in and relocates, I think, something like 20 buildings that had not been totally just destroyed, and brought them up and built New Columbus, which is, you can see kind of off our back porch.
Hmm.
And then the buildings that were destroyed, the gentleman that was in charge of this effort, a guy named Marion Rust, he actually took the bricks and built this hotel. Now his timing was terrible because 1930 was the middle of the Great Depression, and his grand hotel did not take off. But a local family, bought it, lived in it, owned it for close to 70 years, and then in the early 2000s, it fell into disrepair and became a haunted house. And I mean, a lot of vandals and everything. Till about 10 years ago, a gentleman from that area decided to kind of save it and reinvested and brought it back, and then we bought it from him 2 years ago. And so because we are so far out, we do like single barrel picks. We do
Hmm.
a handful of those a year, and we'll actually bring people out, and they stay in our hotel. Uh, we do a great chef dinner, because again, there's not a lot of places to eat and
Hmm.
places to stay, so it's kind of all on site. Then go down, tour the barge, and do the tastings. But I think one of the things that is going to set us apart from other distilleries is how we run our experience. First of all,
Mhm.
we're the only barrel house that you have to wear a life vest to go into. So
Right.
that's cool. And a great, Instagrammable moment or whatever folks are doing these days. But it's also going to be on the hospitality side.
Mhm.
And, our tours are limited to 12 people. It's going to be small. It's going to be intimate. And um, I feel like you just don't have a lot of that
Mhm.
in today. And hey, listen, if I had 50,000 people that wanted to show up, I'd take them. I wouldn't turn them away. I just
Right.
don't think that's going to happen. And so it's, my goal is for when you come out to see our distillery, you feel like you are the most important person
Mhm.
there that day. And you're going to get to know all the ins and outs, all of our secrets, and hopefully leave saying, man, thought it was a gimmick. Now I realize it's a totally different set of variables and all the things,
Mhm.
all the things that we say. So I'm looking forward to creating that shared experience.
And you gave the last couple minutes have basically been a really fantastic teaser for what that tour experience is going to be like. The only thing we're missing are the views and the smells and the sights that kind of come along with being on site. And you said just that last little bit. You said um, people might think it's a gimmick, and I want to go back to the kinetic energy conversation because when you guys first launched, my thought process, my very uneducated thought process is, we've had conversations of other people that are doing similar things where they're aging in either moving things or whatever. But the opportunity, my brain told me that um, it works similar to a heat sink, right? Where you're having cooler water running underneath a barge that's going to get a lot hotter throughout the course of the day. And so those fluctuations that you see in temperature might be more wild in a metal river barge that has cold water running underneath it during the summer than maybe a standard rick house or whatever. But you're talking about kinetic energy. What do you think, or do you know what the impact of being in a river barge is to the aging process? We're not talking about it being faster or slower. We're talking about it being different because variables are different. But like, what is the thing? What do you think that creates the Ingram difference?
Well, I narrow it down to three sets of variables.
Mhm.
So temperature, humidity, and motion.
Mhm.
So starting with the temperature, you're absolutely right that we have a heat sink on that barge. So in the summertime, we get to be about 130 degrees, 135 degrees on that upper level.
Mhm.
On that lower level, though, it'll be about 95 degrees. Now, if you go into a traditional rick house on that same day, if they're 7 stories tall, that bottom level is still going to feel like a cellar.
Yep.
That upper level is going to have that attic feel to it. The difference is because we're only 17 feet from our lowest barrel to our top barrel, you've got a much more compact range. And then, at night, when that sun goes down, that 130 degrees, it goes down to about 80 degrees. And that 95 on the bottom goes to about 80.
Mhm.
So I've got 15 degrees of swing on the bottom level. I've got 50 degrees of swing on that upper level.
Mhm.
And why that's important is those barrels are going to begin to age differently, right?
Mhm.
So the flavors that are developing on that high level, the flavors that are developing on the low level are going to be different. Um, Temperature drives that whiskey. It creates pressure. So if on a hot day in the summertime, if I were to drill into one of those barrels, though that whiskey would shoot out of there because it is under pressure. That whiskey is hot and it wants to just you know move through that wood. Wintertime cools down. You drill into that barrel, it sucks in air like a
Mhm.
vacuum. It's fabulous. And so what that's doing is it's that heartbeat of that barrel. It's just moving that whiskey in and out. So micro heat cycles is really what we're looking at. Diurnal shift that creates micro heat
Mhm.
cycles. But humidity. So I lose about 7% to the angel share a year. That's
Mhm.
about what we're starting to see. Now, traditional Kentucky folks will tell you they see 3 to 5. Well, I see 7% because I don't have the cellar, right? I don't have that bottom level that's losing it at a much slower pace. I guarantee you their upper levels are losing it faster than 7%.
Right.
Because we have the humidity off the river, we are keeping um, we're keeping those barrels moist, so they're not getting hot and dry. They're getting hot and moist, and that provides kind of like an osmotic pressure that keeps that whiskey inside that barrel. Importantly, it keeps the water content inside the barrel. And so, these hazmat barrels, what's happening, the term hazmat is, things that are north of 140 proof. They're coming out of really hot environments where that water is evaporating very quickly. Well, water does a better job of dissolving barrel flavors and sugars than alcohol.
Mm.
So the more water that we keep in a barrel, the more yield, which is good for me, but also the more ability for that water to dissolve barrel sugars, more barrel contact, those sort of things. And then third, barrel contact, motion, right? So by keeping that barge, again, it doesn't need to be an ocean rocking, just shaking it like a cocktail shaker. Over the course of my flagship, for instance, 7.5 years, just slight, gentle movement of that barge is keeping that whiskey churning inside that barrel.
Mhm.
And so it means more exposure to the aging surface, more exposure to the wood, but also, we do 4 char on our barrels. We're actually going to do some experiments this year with different toasts and chars to see, are we maximizing the potential of the barge? But that charcoal kind of sloshes around. So when
Mhm.
they do a 4 char, that scale comes off, and now you have like some of this charcoal. Well, it starts to act a little bit like a charcoal filter. So
Mhm.
you would think more barrel interaction, more movement would create just a really woody, tannic mess. And actually, what I'm seeing is the opposite. We see less wood influence because that charcoal moving almost acts a little bit like a filter to draw out
Mhm.
some of those things. So it's kind of fascinating to see. I had no idea what we were going to expect, but I've got a couple experimental barrels that were the very first ones that we loaded on in 2017, January 2017, when I first started testing on the river. So they're coming up on 9 years old. Um, they're fabulous. And the viscosity, the texture, I think the texture is one that you really start to see the influence on. Our flagship this year, 116 at 0.5 proof, 7.5 years old, 7 of that spent on the river. It's the best thing we've done, batch 5. I really think. Last year's was excellent. This year's is just up a little bit more. And, I look for like, okay, when are we going to fall off the cliff, right? When does that, people say, oh, whiskey, bourbon can only go 12 years. Or it's really lucky if you get 15, right? There's that bell curve where you start to get on the
Mhm.
other side of it. Well, I'm happy to report that at least at 9 years old, we're not on the other side of the bell curve. Each year continues to get more complexity and more interesting. Um, and, and so, there's no playbook for how we do this. So, just constant experimentation to figure out, have we maximized the flavor and the
Mhm.
process? That's part of what we do, and I'm pleased to say it just keeps getting better.
Yeah, and if I think about it from from a whiskey nerd perspective, or anybody's perspective, it feels like it's probably got to be a nightmare to create blends whenever you have such what could be a very wild variation in a 17-foot span, where you're even inside of one barrel to the other. You're looking pretty significant, potentially on yield, potentially on flavor, potentially on a whole bunch of stuff. And then my brain jumps to a whole lot of things, right? So we're pushing up on time, but um, I think do you guys think about ever storing a few barrels at Green River as they come to you, so you have the kind of the control of traditional rickhouse versus this is what our barrel actually does in the barge, so you have got a more linear comparison. It's not exactly right because your north south is a little bit different, but you do get a better concept of exact same distillate went in the barrel on the same day. One is in the barge, one is in a rick house. What happens? Um, are those the kind of experiments you guys look at, or do you look at different mash bills, different barrel chars, finishing, whatever happens? Like what what does the future look like for experimentation for you guys?
So when we started out, we did We did barrels that were control on land and barrels on barge. Ran that for a couple of years.
Mhm.
Um, saw enough of a difference in flavors
Mhm.
to say, okay, let's do the barge. Um, there are kind of some natural experiments. I think if you try some Green River single barrels and try some of ours,
Mhm.
um, you can kind of see some of those comparisons potentially. Um, but where my head goes is not so much of let's compare it to land because
Mhm.
I'm already doing this.
Right.
It's not the horse has left the stable on that.
Mhm.
Where my head goes to is what is the right how do you maximize the mix or find different flavors in the environment that we have to work with, which is the
Mhm.
barge. And so we're going to do some different toasts, different chars. We are playing around with a couple different mash bills. Our flagships have typically been higher rye, and we don't have any more of
Mhm.
that particular mash. So we're going back to doing more of that. Now it'll still be 6, 7 years from now before it's
Right.
it's back to where it was. So like I said, it's a long game, but yeah, we are certainly playing with that. We're playing with a little bit of the barley content in our wheated bourbon to see if we like one or the other. So we have our base, and now we're playing around the edges to see is there something that we like better. I also don't want to do like new Coke and take something that everybody loves and then just
Right.
say, hey, it's new, it's different, it's cool. And they're like, why'd you take what? I liked it.
Mhm.
Um, so I think I don't have an answer for what that looks
Yeah.
like. I don't want to alienate based on we've got something great. Let's not mess it up. Um, what I'll say to the blending is because we have a variety of flavors,
Mhm.
it enhances what we can do with our blends.
Mhm.
Um, take James B. Beam. They have several different brands that are created based on location of inside of the rick house.
Mhm.
And they do that because that section or whatever is going to consistently be this profile or that profile. Um, we will see over time a certain profile develop in this quadrant, that quadrant.
Mhm.
Um, in the meantime, though, Scott Beyer, our master blender, it gives him a spice rack. He now has a depth of flavors. So yes, while it is a nightmare, it's also an opportunity because
Mhm.
we can go in and say, gosh, this blend that we've got another batch coming out, but we need more spice. All right, let's go find the
Mhm.
spice barrels. We need more, of those fruit notes. Okay, well, there's some over here. Let's go get. So like that's how I see it coming down the road is we can just create this really robust cake, if
Mhm.
you will, right? That's multi-layered and multi-leveled, and by combining these different flavors, you now create a more robust, deeper whiskey. Um, and our goal is always just with each batch to make it better than the last. And so far so good.
Yeah, and like I said, we're pushing up on time. I got one last question that I want to kind of kick your way, because we haven't talked about it a ton, but most recently, you guys have released the Uncharted bottling, right? Which is a 92 proof, $40 bottle. Um, Give me, I guess, tell me a little bit about that, and you are exploring some different SKUs because you have the flagship, you have a rye, you have the Uncharted, right? You're kind of expanding this. What was the positioning or the idea behind doing Uncharted?
So the idea behind Uncharted was to make a bartender first bourbon that was a high end bourbon but still approachable from a price point, and to really make the best whiskey we could for the money.
Right.
So, there's a couple things that the reason we chose Uncharted. One, it kind of plays into the fact that our process is uncharted in the bourbon industry.
Mhm.
Also, charts are very important um, to the river industry. So it was kind of a cool way to kind of blend those two. again, heritage is, if you will, but it's 100% recycled glass bottle. I don't.
Mhm.
There's not many people that do that. So that was kind of cool to us. It's a great bartender friendly pour. It actually pours really well. So, we designed the proof point because that kind of maximized the point where it stood up in a cocktail.
Mhm.
And so again, the idea behind this was, how do we create an entry into the Ingram family that could get this liquid into more people's hands and tell the story more, because our OH Ingram line starts at $54, and then the flagship is at 79, and we that's at our high end. So we want to be even affordable on our most expensive, but
Mhm.
everybody's not going to a $79 bottle for their nightly pour. Not everybody, some people are. And so having a $40 bottle, something that can be kind of more of that school night pour, if you will. And I'll say, the response on it's been fabulous. We actually
Mhm.
got 95 points in the International Wine and Spirits competition on it, which beat out, I mean, for the price point, and it beat out tons of fabulous bourbons that are household names. I mean, only 15% in 2025 at the IWSC scored 95 points or higher of
Right.
the bourbons that medaled. So, I mean, I, I think it's about as good as we can make it. So,
Mhm.
it's been fun to bring to life and let it take its own course.
Yeah, and the accolades definitely match the quality of what you're putting in there. And honestly, picking something nautical themed, right? You've got Uncharted, you got Flagship, you've got the opportunity to use things like Admiral, whatever, right? Like you got so many naming opportunities, which is fantastic. And I know that's not the reason why you did it, but it's a positive byproduct here. I think about what the opportunity of the future for something like Ingram is, and I think it's an incredibly unique offering. I've tried to follow it. Being kind of as a sidecar to the space as a podcaster, you follow the different things that are out there, and some things you're like, I'm not going to give that any attention. But what you guys are doing, I think, is interesting enough that everyone should be paying attention to, keeping up with. So I do want to thank you, Hank. Right, so you gave me an hour of your time today. I know you've got a distillery to run. You've got likely some just normal barge company business that you have to do as well. So time is really, really valuable. And you've also got a sick kid, right? Which could also be taking time. So thanks for hopping on and having the conversation with me.
Well, John, thanks for having us on. And, for your listeners that want to find out more, ingramwhiskey.com, Ingram Whiskey on our socials, and come check us out in Columbus. It's worth the trip.
Thanks for tuning into this episode from the Embellish Pod. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform you're consuming this on. Leave a comment if at all possible. Hit me up on social media on TikTok or Instagram at Embellish Pod. You can give me a follow so you can keep up with what's going on here at the podcast. I can also be found at www.embellishpod.com. It's a place to pick up all of my links, accounts, contact details, and so much more. Thanks for stopping by.